Hello and welcome to the Retreat Center collaboration.
So fancy. Welcome everyone. It's good to see you on this, for me, dreary Tuesday. I was sharing that I just got internet back on. We've had some storms in the Poconos. Not sure how everyone else's weather is doing, but I'm glad it came back on because I'm very excited about today's call with Shakiyla Smith from Fetzer Institute. We've chatted a bit and Shakiyla kind of knows this realm, but she'll be spending some time with us talking about adaptive challenges. And I'm just so grateful. In her bio, if you clicked on her name in the reminder email, it says she has an eclectic toolkit. She comes well-rounded with a lot of experiences. And really, as we spoke preparing for this call, she wants to see retreat centers thrive and into this new world as we create it. And I'm really going to leave it at that as an introduction. I know she's got a lot for us today, and I'm just so grateful you all are here and Shakiyla's with us. So Shakiyla.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I love that. And yeah, I do want to see retreat centers thrive. So I just spent 2 weeks on retreat at Gilchrist last month. Gosh, it seems like this COVID year is very strange time. I feel like it's like 1 month is like 2 years basically. But anyway, and I was just really reflecting on how important retreat spaces are for people to connect them with deep time and thin places, you know. So anyway, thank you for the work that you do. And I'm really excited to be here. I'm going to be talking about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and that I've done a lot of work in with public health professionals, as well as people in higher education as well. So just to say that while this is a unique context, this work is work that everybody is grappling with in the 21st century, how to manage complexity and adaptive challenges. So before I go into that, I wanted to maybe just, because I know some of the faces on here, hello, but I don't know everybody. And I was wondering if maybe we could, have you all put in the chat box where you're located and what the external weather is like and what your internal weather is like, since Justine started us off on the weather forecast. So maybe we could do that, and that way we can bring everybody into the space before we get started. And I'll from sunny, airy, warm and sunny. Okay, great. And I'll add mine. I'm in Kalamazoo, and it's sunny and crisp out. Diana, yes, and Oren and Jean, and yeah, a few familiar faces. Boston thundering, yeah. It's always so funny how different parts of the world are in different weather spaces. Like, I find that fascinating. Hi, Janine. Hello. Yes, welcome. Okay, great. Okay. Thank you all for doing that. I feel like a little more connected because from the screen, all of your spaces look pretty sunny as far as I can tell. So thank you. So I'm gonna jump in. I do have a PowerPoint to share, but just because I wanna, some of the content is a little bit, can be a little heavy. So some people need visual cues as well to understand it, but my intention is for this to be also a conversation, but I do want to, bring in some visual cues and content via PowerPoint. So hopefully that does not, offset your usual way of doing things. Can you all see this?
Yes.
Does it, and is it a regular PowerPoint slide?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right. So, as I was saying before, this is sort of what we're up to today, which sounds like it might be appropriate for you all, navigating complexity and adaptive challenges. And this is something I talk about a lot in my work, and I just feel like in these strange liquid times that we find ourselves in, this is an important conversation to be having. So I just wanted to start off with one of my favorite people, like in adult education, Donald Schoen. And I'll read this quote that he offers. Sorry for the particularly gendered language, but if you could feel into the quote, he offers, the reflective practitioner allows himself to experience surprise, puzzlement, or confusion in a situation which he finds uncertain or unique. He reflects on the phenomenon before him and on the prior understandings which have been implicit in his behavior. He carries out an experiment which serves to generate both a new understanding of the phenomenon and a change in the situation. So the reason why I like to start off with that, one, because, my sense is that most retreat center folks are holding this space of reflective practice, if you will, but I wanted to invite that into the room more explicitly, and really just to offer us permission to experience and play with this notion of surprise and puzzlement and confusion. Because I like this notion that in the liquid landscape of the 21st century, that what we need is not necessarily more heroic leaders, but people who are comfortable playing around in ambiguity and unknowing, right? So that's the space that we're in. So I like starting with that. So just to have you reflect for a moment, and if we have time, we'll go back to this at the end and see if you're, this is kind of like my pre-post, if you will. So think of a long-standing challenge that you're holding at your retreat center. It could be you personally or your team or the organization as a whole at the system level, right? So just, bring it to mind. You don't have to share it just now. And then just think about, from your perspective, why has this challenge remained unsolved? Right, like just come up with, if you have a hypothesis, to just sort of like sit with that for a moment. Okay, so just remember that if you have a good memory, this should be fine. If not, if you have a piece of paper, hopefully you all have paper nearby, you could jot down that thing just to remind yourself, and we'll try to come back to that at the end, because I'm curious to see if you have any shifts by the end of our time together around that. Okay, so what are we up to? You know generally what I'm up to, the specifics of what I'm up to today. So I'm joining your community of practice and support. So I'm assuming that this space is already a co-laboratory for ideas and learning. And so I see my role as really just, joining into that co-laboratory space to think and learn together. And as part of that, I will, provide a little introduction and context around some particular concepts that I'd like to offer around change challenges, and then also some concepts around learning and approaches to learning. And we'll have discussion throughout, so I'll like specifically pause to invite you into some inquiries that we'll have as a larger group or a smaller group, and we'll see where we go. And feel free to, even though I'm presenting these concepts and you might not be able to see everyone, just feel free to jump in if you have any questions throughout, but I will pause and ask specific questions at different points, just so that you know. The other thing I'll say too, because I think this is important for context. So this offering that I'm doing here is usually a much larger concept, and so I'm just bracketing certain pieces here for the time constraints that we have. But usually, I would invite you into a collaborative learning process, but we won't do that here. But that's something that I just want to parking lot, because we could talk about that later some other time. That was something that people were interested in. So some of you may recognize these pictures because I took them from your retreat centers. And I told you I was just on retreat, and I feel like, and it was so funny. Everybody was like, "How's your retreat going? How, like, it must be so relaxing. Like, are you like rested and everything?" So these are normally the image. People have certain images in mind, as I'm sure you all know, when they hear about retreats and retreat centers, and they probably have all these projections and ideas about what your work is like. And this is probably very close to what they are thinking about. And maybe you even have held some of these ideas about your work as well. And in fact, the current state of affairs behind the scenes might sometimes feel like this for you all, particularly now with COVID, right? Where you have these rapid changes, limited resources, all of this complexity and ambiguity to think about. And then also, multiple things that you're holding and multiple perspectives and stakeholders that you have to consider in your work, right? So in addition to your typical job skill sets that you have to manage a retreat center, right? There's certain things that you need to do. You may also be finding that there are other capacities that you are needing to have, right? Like that you may not have thought you needed to have when you signed on to do this work. And those might be things like taking a systems perspective, learning, period, and then addressing challenges collaboratively, and then also changing and adapting, right? So those are some of the, does that resonate with anybody, or am I just making this up? Okay, I see people shaking their heads, good. Right, so you find yourself in this really interesting soup, even amongst the beauty. It's a really interesting polarity, in fact, right? The beauty and the mess of the work. So what I want to do is just first introduce, two key concepts that we're going to be talking a lot about now, and that I think really helps to think about the challenges or problems that we face both personally and professionally, but we can think about it in the context of your work. And I'd like to offer that understanding the difference between these can really have a significant impact on your change efforts. And those are technical and adaptive challenges. I don't know if anybody is familiar with those concepts. It's really the person who developed this thinking the most is Ron Heifetz out of Harvard. He does business studies and organizational development type work. But basically, and just to say up front, when I use technical, some people don't like that language. I've heard people use routine challenges because technical makes it seem like we're talking about cars and computers and equipment, but it just really is talking about routine challenges that we have the competencies and knowledge to solve, right? So technical challenges often are easy to identify, and because of that, they lend themselves to quick and easy solutions. They can even be solved by somebody else, so you can outsource them, right? Like if you have a water pump that breaks on the retreat center, you may not be able to fix it, but you can find somebody else to fix it, right? And sometimes they require change in just a few places that are contained within your organizational boundaries. And because of that, people are generally, we like technical solutions because they're, we can get our heads and hands around them, and solutions can be implemented quickly, right? Then we move into the space of adaptive challenges. And I have this arrow here because, so I'm offering this very discreetly to make the point of the distinction, but in fact, a lot of challenges might have both components to them, right? Or they may exist on a continuum, but let's just suppose that you could break them down this discreetly. And an adaptive challenge really is often difficult to identify. So one of the first signs that you're in an adaptive challenge is when you can't even define what the problem is, right? And a lot of our major gnarly or wicked problems, sometimes people call them, we don't, like, different people, reasonable and intelligent people can disagree about where the problem is coming from, right? Like, that's the first sign. And oftentimes they require a creation of new knowledge, right? Like, we may not have the knowledge or competency in this moment to solve the problem. It also often requires changes in our values, our beliefs, and our roles. And then a lot of times I would say that there are systemic problems with no ready solution, right? So that's what we're talking about here. And so just to, like, again, make this point a little clearer, I find that this chart is a little bit easier sometimes to look at it when I'm like, is it a technical challenge or is it an adaptive challenge? And the thing that I want to just sort of just highlight about this again is that technical challenges often require us to take an action orientation, right? Because we know what the problem is and have a solution for it. It still could be complicated, but we know what the problem is and have a solution. We can move into action, right? Like, you don't, or if the barn is on fire, call the fire department, right? Like, take action around it. You don't need to go through a whole process around it. In adaptive challenges, it often requires a learning orientation, which is a little bit different. We're going to unpack that a lot in the next, little bit, because I want to, I have a particular way that I'm thinking about learning that is not often typical. And the other thing is that whose work is it is really important too, right? Because with technical challenges, again, like I was offering, you can outsource it, right? So a broken heater or even a diet change, right? Like, you could hire a nutritionist to help you with that, or if you are really lucky and privileged, you could even, like, order some personal meal programs or whatever to, like, help with those things. Whereas adaptive challenges, which, I think parenting is a great example of, like, a major adaptive challenge, right? Like, there's no authority that you can just outsource that to. Like, you have to be in regular relationship to it, and everybody involved has to be part of it. Part of learning your way through it, if you will, and acting experimentally. And then the final thing I'll say about it is the timeline, which I think is very frustrating for a lot of us, that, like, adaptive challenges often take a while, right? Like, it's not something you're going to solve or fix in the next month, if you will. So are there any, before I move on from there, are there any questions or comments about any of that? Okay, good. So next, this is what I like to call my being, knowing, and doing pyramid, or iceberg. And the reason why I think this is really important is because, and you see I have that little line around what you can observe, is that, like an iceberg, typically our actions and our behavior is most evident to us, and certainly to other people. If it is not evident to us, other people can see it. right? And what's important about that is that you can take perspective on it easily because it's visible and tangible. But underneath our behavior or our action and our doing is our knowing that informs our behavior. And then deeper still is our being, which includes our mental models and our beliefs and our worldview. And why this is important to this conversation is that technical challenges typically exist in the doing and knowing stage, right? So those are, when we think of solutions to those, we can access them a little bit differently, whereas adaptive challenges are often in the knowing and being phase, which makes them a little bit, I think, closer to the bone, if you will, for people. And, you know, approaching change at these deeper levels of knowing and being really requires adaptive solutions. So I think that's what the real punchline is around that one, like what the demand or the invitation is when we're dealing with adaptive challenges. And one of the things that I love this that like Ron Heifetz and Marty Linsky offer is they say that the single biggest failure of leadership is trying to solve adaptive problems with technical solutions. And I can say that I agree with this because I have bumped my head against this multiple times in my own life. And usually what you find is that when you apply technical solutions to an adaptive problem, they just keep coming back, right? Like you can't get traction on them. So that's for me, usually my strategies are that I'll try a technical, but a technical solution, and then that doesn't work, and then I'll try another one harder, and then that doesn't work, and then I'm like, oh, maybe maybe this is an adaptive challenge. So yeah, I just wanted to offer that one. So just to get you again to thinking about this a little bit differently, I wanted to do a challenge sorting, right? Because to bring it home what we're talking about and how critical this is. So if you have a piece of paper and a pen, and hopefully you do, what I would like for you to do is take a moment alone to list out the current challenges that take up your time at work, right? Or in your context, or that keep you up at night. And you don't have to do 20 of them, right? Just do 5. Let's say do 5 of the biggest challenges that take up your time and give you heartburn maybe a little bit. Let's do that. And you don't have to write down all the details, just jot them down, like whatever, like that water boiler that keeps breaking, or you know, or the whatever, taxes. I'm not going to make up anything. Or it could be with colleagues or other organizations. Okay. So do you have your challenges written down? Can you, if you can, like give me a thumbs up or something and say that you've gotten them ish. Okay, I see Ben like, okay, let me give you 1 more minute then. Okay. So if you have your challenges written down, you see how I have this T. Usually if we were in person, I would have these papers already written out for you. So this is interesting doing this virtually. Make a little T, or if you want, I've seen some people just put A or T by their challenges written out, whatever you feel comfortable doing. And then see if you can sort them into technical or adaptive. And if they're kind of like have elements of both in them, you can kind of like put them on the line a little bit, right? But let's see if you can like sort them. And I want to move this up to so that you can like see what we're talking about, right? If this helps you. Okay, so I know that sometimes people find this really challenging, but we're going to invite your colleagues to support you in this. So what I want to do now is I'm going to stop sharing and ask Ben if you can put people into groups of 3 or 4, just for 10 minutes to have you have a conversation about what challenges you came up with, and it'd be interesting to see what your peers think about that, because sometimes when we show other people, they might be like, oh, I don't see that as technical at all. Like, that's really adaptive. So just to talk about that, and one, like, talk about, was this a difficult exercise for you to like sort them? And then where did your challenges end up? And then to talk about if you noticed any patterns, either in your challenges and then in the group challenges. So that's what I would like for you to talk about. I just put it in the chat for you for the next 10 minutes, and then we'll come back and talk about it as a group.
So I've got a couple groups of 3 and a group, maybe 1 or 2 groups of 4 as well for 10 minutes.
Yep, that's great.
Oh, and I'm seeing some private messages. Hold on. Hold on. I'm going to create one more room. Okay, we should be good. Awesome. All right, here we go.
I love that they do that. That's great. So what, I just want to take a few minutes just to debrief that. What came up for people, and did you notice any patterns? Yeah, just what was your experience of that exercise?
I had a huge insight with the 2 people that I was with. As you can see, behind Francisco on his bulletin board, he has a sign that says "Fight poverty, not the poor." And we realized that was sort of the essence of technical and adaptive, that fighting poverty in some ways is technical, but understanding that you're not fighting the poor takes a whole different way of being and holding each other. and that it's the gap between those two, or the space maybe between those two, that we're not very good at attending to. So that while it's easier to do the technical, to fight poverty in a hierarchical way, and to just have people in charge of like raising money or giving away money or whatever, that if you don't attend to trust and transparency in that stage, it's going to be practically impossible when you get to the much more difficult part of the work to then begin to build trust and transparency.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. I think I'm also sitting with like whether or not poverty is a technical challenge. Like that feels like a big one that's intractable, and I don't know that we all agree about even the cause of it, you know?
Right. Good point. Yes.
Anything?
I think one of the things that I realize is what appears sometimes to be a technical problem could actually be an adaptive problem.
Yep.
And that and to recognize that is really critical. So like I was saying to my group that technically Kirkridge could solve its resource problems by putting in 2 infinity pools and taking out a big loan and becoming an upscale center. We would totally solve our it's because we're on a beautiful site. We could solve our problem overnight. We really could. But it's an adaptive question because it's not who we are. It's like buying the wrong clothes or you know, or buying I don't know, some fancy car for trying to plow a field. No, it's not the right solution. So you really have to look at the adaptive side of that, is like who, you know, how do you adjust who you are in order then to solve the technical in a way that's appropriate.
Yeah. That's great. Tim, were you did you have a response to that, or you were gonna say something?
Well, I was just adding to that, that it ultimately comes down to solving the wrong problem.
Right. Yeah.
Solve the problem, it's the wrong problem.
Yeah.
And just to follow up, since I stole the floor, like one of the things that was brought up in our group was just the question of, you know, when you look at these, which do you look at first, right? You know, the realization that our lens tends to be either a technical approach first or an adaptive approach first, right? You know, we have to be attentive to that to look beyond our tendencies.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Any other insights before we move on? Okay. Yeah, no, this is great. This is, I think this is really not a small thing, like you said with Jean. And that's part of the reason why I, you know, like this exercise, which seems like a very sort of like simple, almost like, you know, little exercise, but it really is, and I'll say more about this, like even Heifetz and Linsky, they talk about how that's one of the hardest part of working with these is even identifying the adaptive challenge. That's not, in fact, easy. And so I wanted to show you this. So I do this extra, I've done this with public health people, higher ed people, multiple groups of people. And these are just 2 examples from 2 different groups of challenges. And this normally surprises people, especially in some of the circles I run in, because people are used to problem solving, like that's what they get paid to do, especially public health practitioners, and they like solving problems. And it just blows their mind that like most of them find that their challenges are in fact adaptive. And then they're like, oh my goodness, then what do I do with that information now, right? So yeah, just to say that we're in good company here with other people. And then I just wanted to ask, like, given that, right, given that many or most of our challenges are adaptive or have an adaptive component, even if they're technical, what new or different skills, mindsets, or competencies do you think you are needing, either individually or kind of as a community or a profession, to really address these adaptive challenges that you find yourselves in? I'm gonna stop sharing so that you can, yeah. Diana, were you gonna say something?
Yeah, you mentioned this at the start, Shakiyla, and I've just found myself thinking a lot about what it takes to have a systems, kind of ecosystems at level understanding, and understanding kind of what it takes to shift systems. That stuff that isn't necessarily in our immediate purview, to kind of see peripherally and see the whole.
Yep. Okay, yep, so systems perspective, systems thinking. Anybody else?
I'm really writing a list here of what I think are some of the most important skill sets to learn and grow, and they seem to be interpersonal in a way that the technical side of administration and management seem much more clear cut, but communication and empowership and mentoring suddenly take on completely different senses to me if we're going to work on handling wicked problems collaboratively.
Yep, that's great. Maybe anything else that's coming up for folks?
It could be that the technical challenges feel like immediate and needed, and they actually take up a lot of the bandwidth. So to deal with the adaptive questions, it's about creating the forums and the spaces and the times to actually engage in that long-term planning. Right, there's a water leak, I better go fix it now. Talking about leadership transition, well, it's going to take a lot of time over a long time, so I can always postpone it a little.
Yep, that's great. I love that. This is all beautiful, because we're going to talk about some of this in a minute, so this is great. So I just put those in there. Yeah, so these are just some of the like systems perspective and thinking. And the thing that always comes up for me around this, which is not that these the skill sets and mindsets that we have are wrong, it's just that they're necessary but not sufficient, right? That's the thing about it. And it's the stuff that in fact most people get hired for or rewarded for. And what I hear you all offering, and I've heard this over and over again whenever I talk about these with people, is that there's some other kind of like some new knowledge and capacities that we're needing to grow into in order to meet the challenges that we find ourselves in, like the big ones, you know. And so, you know, my work as somebody who cares about adult development and creating the conditions for people to grow and learn, I find that really, you know, exciting and interesting, you know, that we may not have the competencies or skill sets to do the work that we're called to do right now in this moment. So let's just go, I'm going to make some offerings around that a little bit, right? So I'll invite us into some more conversation around it, but I just wanted to just offer some light framing about capacities or approaches, right, that we might need to address these adaptive challenges or support transformative change work. So this particular set that I'm going to offer now is from Heifetz and Laurie's work. And I can send you the article that talks about this later too. The first thing that they talk about, and this reminds me of what you were offering, Oren, is this notion of getting on the balcony, which I love this language. So it's really about stepping out of the fray or the field of action, right, that we get in every day to see the bigger picture and the bigger view. And I like to think about it as action and inquiry. So action, inquiry, this sort of dance. And it really involves this capacity to move back and forth between the field of action and the balcony. So if you think about, again, your work, how is it that you create structures and space and processes to be able to move back and forth? And that's stuff that you can, we talk about that a lot at Fetzer in terms of how we create space for inner and outer work is one other way of thinking about it. But I like this notion of getting on the balcony and being in the field of action at the same time. Okay, thank you, Deborah. And then the second part that they talk about, which I mentioned before, is identifying the adaptive challenge. That is really difficult. As I mentioned, I bump up against this all the time in my work. That something like one example that I'm managing now is thinking about, like, my schedule is so full, my calendar is crazy, right? And I'm finding that I'm not able to do my more ideating or visioning or strategic work. So then the first thing that I think about doing is, oh, I just need to like clear my calendar. It's a calendar issue, right? So that's the technical approach. And what I did was I blocked off Fridays and some other spaces to do for strategic thinking work, like every Friday. And I've done this since last year. What ends up happening is then I end up filling those Fridays up with other meetings that people need to do, right? So the technical solution didn't work. And then I was like, oh, this is actually an adaptive challenge that I'm in. It's not just like a simple technical one, right? And it really involves me thinking about my relationship to my work and the tasks that I actually do, rather than just clearing space, right? So this identification is not simple. And the question is normally, is this a technical challenge that requires a change in behavior, practice, or strategy, right? Or something that simple expert advice can solve, or technical adjustments can solve, right? That's the question. Or does it require a different way of doing our work? Does it require new competencies, new relationships, and collaboration? And, depending on how you answer that will, get you closer to knowing whether or not it has adaptive components or if it is an adaptive or technical challenge. And then the third thing that they talk about, the other thing I just want to say about that too, before I move on, is that when sometimes unfortunately, I wish I could say that you could identify these pretty quickly. Sometimes you have to just bump up against it, and that's fine too. So I always say when implementation is a problem, it's usually an adaptive challenge. So that's also your first clue that it's not just like simple problem solving. And then the third thing they talk about is regulating distress, which I think is really an important leadership capacity that, we've been talking a lot about in our context, is how can we sit in the fire of change? That's the way that I think about it. And really regulating distress in yourself and others, right? And I bring my yoga practitioner hat here, where I think about this as this balance between ease and effort. here. And so you want to stay in this space of discomfort that necessitates change, right? Like you don't, because it could be easy, Oren, to what you were offering, to just worry about, you know, the day-to-day stuff, because that's easier to solve. You feel better because you're like checking off your to-do list, and to avoid the larger conversations. So how do we not do that, right? Like you want to like walk into or step into these change challenges, but then not be overwhelmed by them, right? So it's, again, that balance between ease and effort, and addressing conflicts and having tough discussions, but really sequencing and pacing work. And that one is not easy. The other one that they talked about is maintaining disciplined attention. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. And this is really about staying the course and doing the work, right? Like we talked about these adaptive challenges as not being things that get solved overnight, you know, like poverty or leadership transitions or, you know, founder syndromes, all these other things that we meet. And how do we, how do we stay the course? How do we stay the course and maintain this discipline around it? And there's more I could say about that, but that is essentially what that's getting at. And then the other one, which I think is really at the heart of adaptive challenges, around leaving the problem with everyone and the solution, which sometimes some of us struggle with that because we have, you know, either we have these notions of heroic leadership, which I think were very, very prominent in the 20th century, especially. And also just at a personal level, sometimes we, you know, we have distorted ideas about where our responsibilities lie, right? We take up responsibility for things that really are collective or system level issues. So it's really about not rushing in to save the day or generating solutions on our own, and then having the responsibility be with the people who have or own the problem, right? And leaving the problem with the problem holders is another way to talk about it. This one is really hard, I will say, for like my public health folks, because we, like, public health people tend to be experts, right? Like they have this expert syndrome. And so it's, you know, you want to solve problems, and it's hard to just leave them with everybody. And then finally, they talk about protecting the voices from below, which I think is really critical. And this is about allowing all voices, especially marginalized or quote unquote deviant voices, that can disrupt the usual patterns, right? And reveal inconsistencies. And so this is where it's helpful to ask this question around, is there something that I or we are missing, right? Is there something that we're missing? And usually if that voice or perspective gives you heartburn or makes you uncomfortable, then you probably need to lean into it. And this is what organizations often marginalize or kill off, quote unquote, deviant voices. And I think part of leadership, especially in these adaptive challenges, is to say, no, like these voices are showing us something that's really important for us to listen to. But, you know, I say that very dispassionately here and know that, like, that is not an easy thing to sit in, you know, in the discomfort of like managing those relationships and that tension. So I don't know if before, I'm going to pause here before I move into the learning space, because then I want to offer some other stuff that might be a little bit more provocative for some people. But are there any thoughts or comments about any of this? Oh, I just saw what Tim offered. I mean, I would say that if it is an adaptive challenge, it is your problem to solve, right? Because that's the whole point. Adaptive challenges require the entire system and all the stakeholders to be part of coming up with those solutions. And defining what the challenge is. So I would, yeah, anyway, that would be my response to that. So, if it is a problem that affects you, then yeah. Did you have something to offer around that, Tim?
No, that was pretty much the reality of the situation, right? I mean, it's the strain of knowing that there's an issue that needs to be dealt with and bumping up against, I guess, like we've talked about before, bumping up against, well, there's a practical solution to this, but the reality is much more on the adaptive side and having to invest the time and the effort on the relationship side, doing the building trust and,
Yep.
you know, doing all the political stuff.
Yep.
To get the obstacles out of the way.
Yes, the really juicy stuff that nobody likes doing. Well, I find that stuff fun. Some of us like doing it, but most people don't like doing it. It's true.
Well, and I guess maybe from a different perspective, as to your point of, you know, protecting the voices from below, you know, that those who are above, who might be in a position of wanting to, you know, kind of keep the course and ignore the challenge and silence the voice from below, and wrestling in that tension, which is sometimes very tense.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, I'm talking about it as if it's like just simple, just protect the voices from below, or invite in that dissident voice that drives you crazy, you know, like that type of thing. But I mean, I think that is the work, you know, and we can develop capacities for that. I think some of it is just that we don't have competency in managing relationships or the interpersonal and personal stuff. And if we develop those, which you can, then I think it makes some of these things less daunting for people, you know, is my experience. Like you can build that muscle around being able to do that work. Thanks, Tim. Okay, so, all right, so now we're about to, stick with me. I just have a few offerings around this. This is, I need to talk about this because there are some assumptions that I'm working with around action and learning that I want us to have a shared language around. And really, a lot of this, again, comes from adult learning folks and assumes that there are 2 levels of learning. I mean, really, there are 3, but we're just going to talk about 2. Right now. And it really is, if you start from right to left, that the results that we get are created by what we do, which is informed by our underlying assumptions, right? So it's another way of thinking about that being, knowing, and doing wheel. And most of our change efforts are focused in at the strategies and techniques, right? Which would be technical. But this is considered single loop learning, right? One example that people often talk about this is that single loop learning is asking the question, are we doing things right? You know, which is good. Like, I actually don't want to create a hierarchy around this. Like, that's fine, because we need to be able to do that. Like, this is a real coup for people to be able, an individual or an organization, to learn that their strategies and techniques are not working, right? Like that's actually a big thing to do. So that's great. And there's a deeper level of learning that we can be invited into, and that gets really juicy. That's really about our underlying assumptions, our frames of reference. And so in double loop learning, you're asking, not moving beyond, are we doing things right, to are we doing the right things, right? So this is really about challenging your underlying mental models and decision rules, right? So one very tangible example that people often use for that is a thermostat, right? So you know how I have mine set to 78 right now. And when it adjusts for the temperature and it comes on and off, depending on where you have it set, that's a single loop learning mechanism, right? Like it says, okay, it's fallen, it's gotten above 78 or below or whatever it is, and I'm going to make an adjustment. The double loop move there would be, should it even be on 78 degrees? Is that even the right setting for this, right? So that's just a very tangible example about single and double loop learning. And the thing, the reason why this is important, again, especially for what we're talking about, is, going back to what Oren was saying, is my question is always, how do I stimulate and support double loop learning in myself and others, right? Like that's the question. What are the structures? What are the processes? What are the practices, especially at the organizational level? Because oftentimes we get rewarded for this typical problem-solving space of single loop learning, and we don't ever go further down to even question the underlying decision rules or mental models around how we are doing things. And so the question is, how do you on a regular basis develop ways to get at those underlying assumptions that can then inform different strategies and techniques? So the other thing that I wanted to offer, going down the rabbit hole a little bit further with these, learning ideas, is that I'm operating again from this assumption that learning, I talked about learning is not passive, right? That it is an active, ongoing process of sense making and discovery, which is really key to addressing adaptive challenges, right? That adults learn from experience, and children too, but we're talking about in our context. Adults learn from experience, and training is good, but we learn from experience, and that we also learn best in community or in relationship, especially when it comes to double loop learning, because I've actually gotten to the point where I don't believe that you can do any deep transformative learning on your own or outside of relationship or community, because it's often difficult to get beneath the iceberg, right, to our underlying assumptions and being without feedback and support from others, or without the challenge of others. So this goes to this importance of collaborative learning. And again, what does this mean for you and your work? The implications of this is, first of all, the collective IQ is always going to be higher than the individual IQ, right? That's always the case, because no one person can know or hold all of the perspectives. And so again, it really just underscores the importance of abandoning this heroic leadership model that we keep getting stuck in, and that feels so hard to let go of, because it triggers these concerns about competence and knowing and not knowing, right? That's the stickiness for us individually, but it gets played out systemically. And it's really about, how do we figure out how to work with others to uncover and challenge our underlying assumptions, and to be able to take perspective on our thinking. So, and then I'll just offer this last bit, and then we'll go into some discussion about this. Another learning piece is, all of this is, I will say, very geeky adult learning stuff, but I think it has relevance. This is an experiential learning cycle. It really illustrates how adults learn from experience, right? So I just offered that adults learn best from experience. This is how that happens. And it really is this action reflection cycle that we're in every day, right? So we're doing this every day, even unconsciously, right? Like we take action on something, we reflect on it, or we make an assertion or a hypothesis around what that experience was like and our feelings, and then we like come up with some revised theory around that, like, oh, that I'm never going to do that again, or I can't say this to this person. or that didn't work out, and then you apply it in your, further actions, and then, just on and on and on, right? So we're constantly, again, learning is not passive. Learning is an active, ongoing process of sense making and meaning making that we are doing every single moment of our lives. And so part of, again, this notion of how we learn from experience is to really break up this practice piece to also have like a metacognition, right? And that metacognition is, just a fancy word for awareness of our thinking and our assumptions. So how is it that you make this process more explicit? And so part of adaptive learning or getting on the balcony is really about reflecting on action and experience, but also reflecting on your thinking, right? So that's where you get that underlying assumptions piece. And again, how do we as reflective practitioners doing our work, or people solving these, or not even solving, managing or holding complexity in these gnarly problems, create space to both be in our practice and also reflect on it, right? So that's the question that we're always in of what are these structures and how do we do that not accidentally is really the question. And that's going to be different for each person in each context, but that's sort of what the invitation is to thinking about how we address these or meet complexity and address these adaptive challenges. So I think one of the questions I wanted to just I'm going to ask you to consider some of that. So just pause for a minute to take in some of that information, and then I'll offer this, and then I want to enter into a discussion for the rest of our time. So just my final thoughts, again, how do you move from the field of action onto the balcony, right? Back and forth, what's that dance? How do we also consider technical versus adaptive challenges in our work? And then again, as a reminder, we cannot solve adaptive challenges with technical solutions. You can try, but that is not how those things work. And then just consider double loop move. What I mean by that is, again, I'm always asking myself, what is the double loop learning opportunity here? So to go back to that example I gave you, my double loop learning moment when I tried to clear my schedule to have more time for ideation and dreaming and visioning, and realize after 6 months that that did not work. And in these other interventions, these other technical solutions that I tried, I realized that, oh, some of it is about how I'm thinking about my work even. Right, so I'm filling up my days with supporting my team, being in on all of the discussions and decision making around stuff. That's why I don't have time for some of my other work, because I'm in the weeds of everything all the time, right? So even the way that I'm holding my role or thinking about what the value is of my role or how I'm supposed to support my team is not supporting this other thing that I'm trying to do. That was a really important double loop learning move, right? So that I don't just do these interventions that don't have any traction. So just that's what I want to offer. Take a moment, and I'm going to put these in the chat, but I just wanted to have a discussion about any thoughts, feelings, new perspectives, activations. If you have, you don't like something I offered, I would love to see how that's emerging for you around these concepts. How does it relate to your work? All of that stuff. And then also I'm curious to talk about, or for you to think about, how you can take an intentional praxis. That's another way to think about that cycle I offered, or double loop learning approach in your work. And then if you have any remaining questions. There we go. I'm going to put the questions in there, but that's what I have to offer today.
I wonder, Shakiyla, if you have, from your experience, any advice, wisdom to offer us as we really struggle to move to double loop learning and create the structures that will facilitate that.
Yeah, I feel like, and this is sitting with today, because I feel like I'm really holding this very personally in my own system. And I think there's like some of it, I really think this is its own double loop learning moment that I'm having, right? That like there's some really basic and flawed assumptions that we have about the nature of work and progress, right? I was just talking to, you all know Michelle Scheidt. We had a really interesting conversation this morning during about this, and where some of it is that we think, which it is, the work that we are doing is very critical, and it's work of a lifetime, right? It's work of a lifetime. And so getting caught up in this like productivity trap, or this like, this sort of consumptive model that we have around just doing like more it's a trap. That's the thing, it's actually a trap. It doesn't create the world that we're trying to envision for ourselves. And we keep, that's another feature, I think, of trying technical solutions to adaptive challenges, is that you just keep doing more, harder, faster, bigger, you know, and like, okay, that's why this is not working. No, it's because your underlying assumption about it is off, you know, or your value structure is off. So I just say that to say that I think there's something about it for those of us in this work to just really stay connected into this deeper vision of the work that we're trying to do, and to know that some of it may feel countercultural, and you may not get all of the rewards and kudos and whatever that you feel like doing that work. But it is, I do really believe that that's what the work is. But it's so easy to get kind of like sucked into these larger system dynamics. So I guess it's just not advice, but just more inspiration to just, you know, keep going, and to like be in communities and with people that remind you of what the actual work is. But I would be curious about any, like, what's coming, like, how are you processing all of that information? That was a lot.
I would say it's just really relevant to our collaborative conversations and the kind of collaborative leadership that we want to hold. And that for me, it really activates my anxiety about the timelines stretching, and that productivity mindset of like, surely we can solve these problems and I can be the solver. And then it's like, no, I can't. We all have to solve it together, and that's going to take a while. And that's hard to sit and hold. And yet it's what we've been doing this whole time, and we continue to do it, and we're having a lot of success doing it. Look at this conversation. So it's like I constantly have to do the reframe, and that takes energy. Yeah.
Yep, I am with you, my friend. Yes, I'm on stage with you. Yeah. Yeah, can I read something to y'all? I just offered this to our, we're doing strategic planning, and I did offer this as an opening. It's from Valerie Kaur's See No Stranger book. And this felt like so relevant, and it's getting at what you were talking about, Ben. That's what made me think about it. I'll just read like a little excerpt of it. She writes, "Revolutionary love is practiced in community. Each of us has a role in any given time. We can all be midwives in this time of great transition. The future might still feel dark and unknown, and we might not live to see the world to come. But when we choose to show up with love, our labor becomes an end in itself. We can measure our lives not by what we produce, but by our faithfulness to the labor. Revolutionary love is demanding labor, but it is also creative, transformative, and joyful labor, immeasurably complex and messy, tumultuous and revelatory, marked by wonder and worth it. Revolutionary love is how we last.
Hear, hear.
Yeah, I was like, yes, Valerie, yes. Yeah, this is work of a lifetime. I mean, it's not, you know, yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Diana.
I feel like this has been a thread through many of our community calls of being versus doing. So I thank you, Shakiyla, for adding to this. It was a lot of content, but it's a good reminder, as Diana wrote, to slow down. And I find it ironic that as retreat center staff or admin or board, that we have challenges doing that, even though we create spaces for others. We invite others into our spaces to slow down, to do this reflective engagement. And yet, you know, as examples have been said, we're running around busy and producing for others. And of course, that is the water heater to transitions. So I just am lifting, that's been something for me in this call, is we're inviting people to do that, and we're not tending to ourselves and our own staff or communities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would go back to that question that Oren was asking, like, how can you create space and structures intentionally to allow for that learning reflection cycle? This is one, by the way, but how do you do it in your actual work?
I think to kind of build on what Justine was saying, it's about the balance. Because I've seen, you know, you could be caught up in either circle. You know, there are organizations and communities that get caught up in the adaptive circle and then just stay in it forever. So it's like anything in life, it's about finding the balance. You know, in some ways, it's hard not to think about kind of like the crisis the world is facing. There's all these people, we'll solve climate change by shooting giant fans into the sky, right? That's a technical solution to an adaptive problem. It wouldn't hurt, but then the vice versa is to just talk about it forever is also not going to get you there. So like everything, it's like there has to be a balance between the two, which is kind of like in the small group that I was with Diana, she said like most of her stuff fell in between the spaces.
Yeah.
And kind of finding that balance and knowing when do you move from one to the other, recognizing that different personalities, different cultures are conducive to different ways of moving in the world.
Yeah, thank you for that reminder, Oren. Yeah, because again, like just as a clear, like adaptive doesn't mean that you're just like sitting around talking. Like if you remember, the cycle was about doing semi-experiments for learning purposes. That's what, so again, I think there's like there's this notion that learning is passive and that it's just navel gazing, and it's not. Like there's a praxis piece, and that's what that experiential learning cycle was offering, right? That there's practice and metacognition. And we live in a culture that privileges practice over metacognition. So really, I think our thing is to try to like build in intentional structures for action and reflection. But it's both of them, to Oren's point. Like, I think that's so critical. Thank you, Oren, for bringing that up.
I just have a comment about getting a balcony view.
Mm-hmm.
There's a wonderful quote by Carl Marney about being cheered on by the balcony people. And it makes me think of ancestors and the history that's gone before us. And that we think like we're the center of the universe. But there have been people that have gone way before us and have done very difficult tasks and held things together and had vision. And I just have to remember the ancestors as we move this forward, because it ain't all about me.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it seems like just the, I mean, the content was meant to spark your thinking, but to think about, again, like, how do you use this information to create some of this space, either in this group or your other groups too. So I think that's what the invitation is. And to also be really like thinking about, is this an adaptive challenge or is this a technical challenge? And where do I need to change my underlying assumptions about it, you know, about what's happening here? So I think that's moving it into the more practical realm, which I think that's like an ongoing inquiry, right? So thank y'all. And thank you for your work too. I want to like, wish I could come visit all of your retreat centers. Be like my retreatants. Mm-hmm.
Any final comments before we close from Shakiyla or anyone here? Whew, well, wonderful. I was taking notes and I had direct message people, but we will share this recording and our notes and some resources that Shakiyla referenced because it is an ongoing process. This isn't just a one and done conversation. So Shakiyla, maybe we'll have you back and you'll be at one of our retreat centers. And if anyone would like to have a conversation, please let us know and we can help connect or hold that conversation as this is continued work. And thank you everyone for being with us today.
Thank you.
Good to see you all.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks, Oren. Thanks, Jean. Thanks, everybody. Eve,
Thanks
Sally.
so
Thank you,
much.
Shakiyla. Take care.
Bye.
Happy fall, happy autumn.
See you, Nancy.